On a freezing Chicago afternoon, as the wind carved through the streets and hope felt like a fragile flame, a single encounter changed everything. A weary woman fighting to keep her world standing crossed paths with a stranger carrying more secrets than he dared reveal. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, a quiet spark defied the cold. Neither knew that this fragile beginning would unravel a past buried in shadows, or awaken a love powerful enough to challenge truth itself. Welcome to a story of heartache, resilience, and breathtaking romance. If you enjoy emotional tales like this, please subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers so our channel can continue to grow. Chicago's late November wind moved like a living thing, circling corners with a sharp whistle that slipped beneath coats and scarves, testing every layer of warmth the city held on to. Olivia Bennet braced herself against the cold as she stepped out of the community center, her arms full of folders and donation forms that refused to stay neatly stacked. The sky above her stretched in a heavy grey sheet, promising more snow by nightfall. She had already spent the entire morning arguing for the smallest sliver of funding, fighting paperwork that seemed to grow heavier each year. Her breath left her in a soft cloud as she closed her eyes for a moment, preparing for the walk to the grocery store 2 blocks away. Even surviving errands felt like its own battle. Inside the store, the heat nearly overwhelmed her. She hurried through the aisles, grabbing canned goods for the pantry and a few essentials for herself, determined to finish the errand quickly. But outside, the wind returned like a slap. A sharp gust tore at one of the paper bags, ripping it open and sending apples rolling across wet pavement. Before Olivia could react, a man reached out and caught the last apple before it hit the slush. He straightened slowly, holding the fruit with care, and for a moment the cold around them seemed to pause. "Here," he said, in a warm, steady voice as he offered it back. "I think this one was trying to escape." Olivia let out a breath that almost resembled laughter. "Thank you. Today is not helping." The man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that softened the edges of a hard day. He was tall, dressed in a simple dark coat that carried no brand or extravagance. Snowflakes settled in his dark brown hair, melting against the warmth of his skin. His eyes, deep and watchful, held an unusual quietness, as if he was studying her without judgment. "Let me help you with the other bag," he said gently when he noticed her struggling. "Oh no, I'm fine," she replied out of habit, shifting her weight and nearly dropping another can. His voice lowered. "Please, it looks like today has already asked enough of you." There was something so careful in his tone, so respectful, that Olivia nodded without further resistance. He lifted the bag as though it weighed nothing and fell into step beside her. The city hummed around them, cars splashing through slush, people wrapped tight against the cold, but somehow the walk felt quieter than it should have. They reached the corner where Olivia needed to turn. "Thank you," she said again, adjusting her scarf. "You didn't have to do that." He shook his head softly. "I know." When he handed her the bag, his fingers brushed hers. It was barely a touch, but the warmth of his skin lingered like a secret. His eyes met hers for a heartbeat too long, filled with an intensity that surprised her. "I'm Luke," he said quietly, almost as if the name had been chosen just for this moment. "Olivia." He repeated it under his breath, as if committing it to memory. Then he stepped back with a small nod, letting her continue her path alone. Olivia walked away quickly, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest. She did not have time for unexpected warmth. Not today, not in this life. But as she reached her block, she realized she was smiling for the first time that afternoon. Luke walked in the opposite direction, hands deep in the pockets of his coat. When he turned the corner, his expression changed. The quiet charm in his eyes shifted into something tight and weary. His phone buzzed again, and he finally pulled it out. A single message lit the screen. "Where are you? The board is demanding answers." Luke stared at it silently, his jaw tightening. The cold wind caught his coat, pushing it back as if urging him forward, but he stood still, frozen, in the middle of the sidewalk. After a long moment, he slid the phone back into his pocket without answering. He walked toward his worn apartment building with heavy steps, but his mind remained with the woman whose name he had spoken aloud, as if it belonged to a safer world. Something in her gaze had reached a place he had forgotten existed, a place untouched by the noise of his collapsing empire. Inside his dim room, Luke sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the radiator hiss and rattle. He replayed Olivia's voice, her tired smile, the way she tried to stand strong against a day that kept pulling her down. He exhaled slowly, leaning forward until his elbows rested on his knees. "For one moment," he whispered into the quiet, "it felt like I belonged somewhere." Outside, the wind sharpened and snow began to fall in gentle spirals, covering the city in a cold but hopeful softness. And though Olivia tried to focus on her evening tasks, her thoughts drifted back to the man with steady eyes and careful hands, a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, leaving behind a warmth the winter could not erase. She told herself it was nothing, but her heart, fragile and tired, whispered otherwise. The next morning arrived wrapped in a layer of pale winter light, the kind that softened the edges of buildings but did nothing to warm the air. Olivia Bennet stood inside the community centre's main hall, rubbing her chilled hands together as she reviewed the schedule clipped to her clipboard. The heater groaned like an old animal, and she sighed, tilting her head back as if seeking strength from the ceiling itself. Children would arrive soon for tutoring, and volunteers were already late. Her nerves tightened as she remembered the budget meeting from the day before. One wrong calculation had nearly sent Diane Porter into a panic, and Olivia was still trying to make sense of the numbers. She pushed her hair behind her ear, took a breath, and forced herself into motion. The center needed calm, it needed structure, it needed someone who would not collapse beneath the weight of too many responsibilities. She tried to be that person every day, even when her legs trembled beneath her. When she reached the entrance, the door swung open at that exact moment, and a burst of cold air swept in. Her breath caught when she saw who stepped inside. Luke. He stood in the doorway wearing the same dark coat, his hair carrying the slightest trace of frost. He looked at her with a quiet gentleness that had no right to make her heart stutter the way it did. He removed his gloves slowly, as if unsure whether he was welcome, and gave her a small, almost shy nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and warm against the icy air behind him. Olivia straightened, pretending she felt nothing. "Morning. Can I help you with something?" He hesitated, searching her eyes in a way that made her chest tighten. "I was wondering if you need volunteers. I have time. I'd like to help." Her brows lifted before she could hide her surprise. She had met many men in her life who offered help only to gain something in return. But there was no arrogance in him, no smug confidence. Only sincerity, only stillness. That unsettled her more than any charm might have. She cleared her throat. "We always need help, but it can be demanding and unpredictable." "I'm not afraid of work," he replied softly. "Just tell me where you want me." The words held a subtle meaning she could not decipher, something fragile, something aching. Olivia took a step back, gesturing for him to enter fully. "Fine, but I'm assigning you the least glamorous tasks. If you disappear after an hour, I won't be surprised." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Try me." Olivia led him to the multi-purpose room, where folding chairs were scattered in disarray. Luke immediately began gathering them with smooth, efficient movements. She watched for a moment, not because she doubted him, but because his presence felt strangely grounding. There was a steadiness to him, a deliberate calm, as if he had learned to carry storms without letting anyone see the damage inside. When she turned away, Malik burst through the hallway, slamming his backpack onto the floor. His face was tight with frustration. "Homework again," he muttered, crossing his arms. "I'm done with this." "Malik," Olivia called out, walking toward him. "Whatever happened today, you're still expected in tutoring." "I said no," he snapped, his voice trembling not with disrespect but with hurt. Before Olivia could respond, Luke stepped forward, quiet as a breath. He didn't speak immediately. He simply lowered himself to Malik's level, resting one elbow on his knee so they were eye to eye. "Sometimes," Luke said gently, "the day feels heavier than we planned for. Maybe it's not really the homework you're done with." Malik blinked, surprised by the softness in the older man's tone. "You don't know me." "You're right," Luke said, "but I know what it feels like when the world pushes too hard." Olivia watched the exchange carefully. Luke's expression carried an understanding she could not explain, and Malik's defensive posture gradually loosened. After a long moment, the boy sighed, nodding reluctantly. "Fine, I'll try." Olivia touched Malik's shoulder. "Thank you." Luke stood silently, his eyes flicking toward Olivia for the briefest second. The look held an unspoken gratitude, as though he felt honored to have helped. As the morning unfolded, Olivia assigned more tasks to Luke. He organized donated clothing, fixed a wobbly bookshelf, and swept the hallway with unembarrassed ease. Children tugged at his coat, asking questions, and he answered each one patiently. She found herself watching him more than she wanted to admit. He did not just complete tasks. He softened tension, brought quiet where there had been chaos. Even Diane, with her sharp leadership instincts, paused once to observe him and gave Olivia an approving nod. By midday, snow began drifting lightly outside the windows. Olivia found Luke near the break room, washing his hands at the small sink. "You handled Malik well," she said softly. Luke dried his hands on a towel, his expression shifting into something shy again. "I didn't do much." "You listened," she countered. "That's more than most people offer." He lowered his gaze, almost as if her praise embarrassed him. "You're the one he trusts. I just borrowed the moment." A delicate warmth rippled through her. She turned toward the coffee machine and poured 2 paper cups. "Here," she said, offering one. "Volunteer rations." He took it carefully, their fingers brushing. The contact was small, innocent, but the air between them reacted as if struck by lightning. Olivia felt heat crawl up her neck. Luke's breath deepened, ever so slightly. "Thank you," he murmured. They walked toward the entrance steps, finding a spot where they could see the city streets slowly turning white. The world outside seemed quieter, gentler in its stillness. Olivia wrapped her hands around her cup. "Why are you here, Luke? Really? You don't seem like a man who wanders into volunteer work by accident." He stared at the snow for a moment before answering. "I needed somewhere to be useful." "Useful?" she repeated. "Not many people use that word when they talk about themselves." His eyes met hers with a vulnerability that made her heartbeat flutter. "I've spent a long time feeling misplaced and tired. Being here feels different." She could not look away. There was something extraordinary about the way he spoke. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, but full of quiet truth, like a confession whispered to the wind. "Everyone feels lost sometimes," she said softly, though her voice wavered under the weight of their connection. "I'm not lost," he replied, his gaze lowering to her mouth before quickly lifting again, "just searching for something honest." The world around them disappeared. No noise, no wind, no snow, only the magnetic pull of a moment suspended in time. Olivia felt the warmth in her chest spread slowly, cautiously, awakening emotions she had pushed down for too many years. She stepped back first, breaking the spell. "I should check on the pantry." Luke nodded, but the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. "Of course." But he followed her, Not closely, not intrusively, just enough that she felt his presence like a steady heartbeat behind her. The rest of the day unfolded with a delicate mixture of routine and unexpected intimacy. Luke carried heavy boxes without being asked. Olivia guided a group of children through a reading activity, occasionally glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Except he was looking. Every time. He watched her with a quiet reverence, as though every gesture she made mattered. By late afternoon, the center finally began to settle into a peaceful rhythm. Olivia walked to the office doorway and found Luke folding stray blankets into neat piles. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You're still here," she said, unable to hide her surprise. He looked up, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. "You told me to try. I did." She tried to suppress the smile threatening to escape. "Most volunteers last a couple of hours. Some don't even make it to lunch. Do I get a medal for surviving one day?" Luke asked, stepping closer. "No medal," she said, her voice softening. "But you can stay, if you want." He stopped a breath away from her. The closeness sent a shiver down her spine. His voice dropped into something low, unguarded. "I want." Olivia's breath trembled, just enough for him to notice. His eyes warmed, but he did not reach for her. He simply waited, letting the moment unfold with the care of a man who understood that real intimacy was not taken, but allowed. She cleared her throat and stepped aside. "Come on. I'll show you where we keep the extra supplies." As she led him down the hallway, their shoulders brushed. Once, twice. Each time, her pulse reacted with a betraying surge of heat. Luke walked beside her silently, but his nearness spoke volumes. When they reached the storage room, she turned toward a shelf, pretending to search for something. But she felt him behind her. Close, warm. Quiet enough that she could hear the soft rhythm of his breath. Without thinking, she spoke his name. "Luke!" He responded instantly, his voice a whisper. "Yes." She swallowed hard and forced her mind back into order. "Thank you. For today, the center needed the help." His reply came slow, gentle, almost reverent. "I needed the center." Olivia looked up at him, and their eyes locked in a connection so intense she had to steady herself with a hand on the shelf. The air thickened between them, filled with a fragile yearning neither dared touch. Everything inside her tightened, the longing, the fear, the awareness that this man carried a depth she had not expected. And something inside him reached for her too, silently, desperately. But Olivia forced herself to step away. "See you tomorrow, Luke," she said, her voice trembling with a truth she refused to acknowledge. His answer was a quiet promise, spoken as if it came from a place deeper than he intended to reveal. "I'll be here." Olivia walked away before her heart betrayed her. But for the rest of the night, no matter how she tried to distract herself, she felt the ghost of Luke's nearness, like a warmth she could not escape. Snow had settled overnight, blanketing Chicago in a quiet white veil that softened even the city's sharpest corners. Olivia Bennett arrived early at the community center, brushing powdery snow from her coat collar as she unlocked the staff entrance. The building felt colder than usual, the air heavy with the metallic scent of old pipes and winter drafts. She stepped inside and exhaled slowly. It would be another long day, one of those days where the world felt heavier than her shoulders could manage, but she had never been one to turn away from weight. She carried it, lifted it, organized it, and when necessary, fought it with the stubbornness of someone who refused to give up on people who had already been given too little. As she moved through the hallway, she paused at the faint sound of something dripping. It came from the storage wing behind the supply closet. She opened the door and found a shallow pool of water spreading across the tiled floor, the unmistakable drip of a burst pipe echoing sadly through the space. She let out a breath. Perfect timing, she muttered, setting her bag down. She rolled up her sleeves and searched for the valve behind the shelf, her fingers freezing from the icy spray as she tightened it. She managed to stop the worst of the leak, but the damage was already done. Boxes of toiletries, coats, and blankets were soaked. A deep voice came from behind her. "Do you need help?" She turned and found Luke standing in the doorway, wearing a soft grey sweater and a dark scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melting slowly into droplets that slid down the strands. His expression held concern and a quiet determination, as though stepping into crises was natural for him. "You're early," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I couldn't sleep," he replied, stepping inside, "and I thought you might already be here." His words made her pause, a flutter in her chest betraying her. She cleared her throat and gestured toward the ruined boxes. "A pipe burst. Some things are salvageable, some aren't. I'll need to move everything out before it molds." Luke nodded, removed his scarf, and knelt beside her without hesitation. "Tell me what to carry." Together they lifted box after box, sorting items, creating piles, and setting aside anything that could be dried. Their movements began to fall into an unexpected rhythm, hands brushing lightly whenever they passed items between them. Every accidental touch sent a pulse of warmth through her that she tried, unsuccessfully, to ignore. At one point he reached for the same box she did, and their fingers pressed together with more pressure than they intended. She felt the strength and gentleness of his grip. He held her gaze, his voice low and slightly rough when he whispered, "Careful." The single word curled into the air between them, intimate in ways that made her heart beat faster. When the room was finally cleared, Olivia leaned against the doorframe to catch her breath. Luke wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at her with a softness that felt both comforting and dangerous. "You handle a lot on your own," he said quietly. She shrugged, though the movement felt heavier than she meant it to. "If I don't, no one else will." "That can't be true," he replied. "There have to be people who want to help." Olivia met his eyes with a small, sad smile. Wanting to help and actually helping are two different things. Luke's expression shifted. Something pained flickered across his features, something he worked hard to hide. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You shouldn't have to carry everything alone." For a moment she could not breathe, his nearness, the sincerity in his tone, the way he looked at her as though he wanted to shoulder every weight she bore. It all pulled at something deep within her. But she forced herself to step aside. "I'm fine," she said, even though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Luke didn't argue. Instead, he followed her into the small office she used from time to time. It was barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves overflowing with binders. Olivia turned on the lamp, the warm glow illuminating stacks of unfinished paperwork. "More trouble?" Luke asked softly. She let out a rueful laugh. "Grant deadlines, budget sheets, inventory requests, and this," she pointed to a thick folder, "is a funding proposal that needs revisions. I stayed up half the night trying to finish it." Luke stepped closer, his brows drawing together. "Let me help." She blinked at him. "You don't have to do that. You've already done more than enough today." "I want to," he said simply. His voice held no pressure, only sincerity. Olivia hesitated, then handed him the folder. He sat beside her, eyes scanning the pages. His focus was intense, the crease between his brows deepening as he read. The silence between them grew warm, soothing. Olivia found herself watching the way his fingers traced the edges of paper, the way his jaw tightened when he concentrated. "You're good at this," she said slowly, surprised. Luke looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I've had experience with paperwork, too much of it." Doing what? She asked gently. He hesitated, then offered a vague, careful smile. Different things. She sensed he was avoiding the full truth, but something about his guardedness didn't feel deceptive. It felt protective, as though there were pieces of himself he wasn't ready to share. They worked side by side for more than an hour. At times their arms brushed, sending small sparks of heat along Olivia's skin. Several times she caught him glancing at her, not with boldness, but with a quiet admiration that made her pulse stumble. When they finally finished the revisions, Olivia leaned back in her chair with a long sigh. "Thank you. That would have taken me all day alone." Luke looked at her with a softness that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "You don't have to do everything alone, Olivia." Her breath hitched at the tenderness in his voice. She stood to gather the papers and realized the room felt too warm, too intimate, too revealing. She moved toward the window, needing air, even if the cold outside could cut through bone. Luke followed her slowly. "Are you all right?" She opened the window a crack, letting the crisp air rush in. "Just overwhelmed. Sometimes it feels like this place is held together with tape and prayer." He stepped beside her, close but not touching. "It's held together with you." Her heart faltered. She turned toward him, and for a moment neither of them moved. The closeness, the warmth of his breath mixing with the cold drifting from the window. The way his eyes softened as they traced the lines of her face, all of it felt like gravity pulling her forward. She looked away, needing distance. "We should get the blankets drying." Luke nodded, though his gaze lingered on her a moment longer. They left the office together and crossed the hallway toward the back exit where the fire escape waited. It was the only place with enough air circulation to dry the blankets quickly. As soon as they stepped outside, the cold hit them full force, stealing their breath. Olivia shivered but kept moving, spreading blankets over the metal railing. Luke worked beside her, his breath visible in the frigid air. When the last blanket was hung, they stood side by side, looking out at the snow-covered alleyway behind the center. The city loomed beyond the rooftops, its skyline sharp against the pale sky. Olivia hugged her arms around herself. "Some days I wonder if all this effort will ever be enough." Luke turned toward her slowly. "It already is." She lifted her eyes to him, and the sincerity in his expression shook her. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she felt the warmth radiating from his body despite the cold. "You give everything you have," he murmured. "More than anyone I've met." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness," he said, his tone low and honest. "It's the truth." The words hovered between them, heavy with meaning. Olivia felt them settle deep inside her, unraveling a tension she had carried for far too long. "Luke," she whispered, her gaze drifting to his mouth without permission. He noticed. His breath caught, his eyes darkened with something tender, something aching. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her every chance to step away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her forearm, a feather-light touch that sent warmth rushing through her despite the cold. She trembled, but not from the winter air. His voice was barely a whisper. "Olivia, you don't have to face everything alone." The vulnerability in his tone, the quiet plea beneath his words, wrapped around her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensation wash over her, the wind against her cheeks, his nearness warming her skin, the unspoken promise forming between them. When she opened her eyes again, he was looking at her as though she were the only source of light in a dark world. His hand slid gently down her arm until their fingers met, gloved but entwined. The contact was soft, hesitant, but full of a yearning neither dared to fully release. "I'm here," he said softly, as though offering a truth he had no right to give. Olivia's breath trembled. She squeezed his hand, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." For a moment it felt as though time held its breath. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, and the city hummed in distant silence. It was Olivia who stepped back first, overwhelmed by the intensity of what had passed between them. She released his hand gently. "We should go inside. It's freezing." "Yes," Luke said quietly, though his eyes remained on her a moment longer, filled with emotions he didn't yet know how to express. They walked back into the building side by side, their shoulders brushing lightly as they crossed the threshold into warmth. Neither spoke, but both felt the truth settle in their chests, deep and undeniable. Something had begun, something delicate, something powerful, something neither of them yet knew how to name. The morning unfolded with a deceptive stillness, the kind that made Chicago seem gentler than it truly was. The sun broke through the grey clouds, just enough to cast soft gold across the snow, giving the illusion of warmth even though the air cut through coats like sharpened glass. Olivia Bennet hurried across the street toward the community centre, balancing a stack of folders and a travel mug of rapidly cooling coffee. Her breath curled upward in faint spirals, disappearing into the cold. Inside, the centre buzzed with its usual chaos. Children's laughter spilled from the tutoring room, volunteers shouted greetings from the hallway, and the heater rattled in its ongoing attempt to keep the building from freezing. But beneath that everyday noise, Olivia felt tension collecting like dust in the corners. Today was supposed to bring good news. A promised donation from a local organization had been in the works for weeks. It was not enough to fix everything, but it could keep their after-school program running through the spring. She walked straight to Diane Porter's office. The director stood by her desk, shoulders stiff, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression, usually so composed, looked wounded. "Please reconsider," Diane said, her voice steady, but carrying an edge Olivia rarely heard. "The children depend on these programs. Yes, I understand the budget constraints, but we had an agreement." Olivia felt her stomach drop. She closed the door quietly behind her, watching the conversation unfold like a slow disaster. Diane listened for a long moment, then her shoulders sank in defeat. "I see. Thank you for your time." She hung up. Olivia didn't breathe. "The donation?" "Gone," Diane whispered. "They withdrew it this morning. No explanation beyond a vague financial redirection. Everything is collapsing at once." Olivia pressed a hand to her heart. She thought of Malik, of the families waiting in the cold for pantry distributions, of the tutoring sessions that gave children a second chance. "We'll manage," she said, though she didn't believe it. Diane sank into her chair. "You always say that. And you always act like it's impossible," Olivia replied gently, crossing the room. She placed her hand on the woman's shoulder. "But we are not giving up." Before Diane could respond, a soft knock echoed from the doorway. Luke stood there. His presence filled the room with a warmth Olivia had not expected. He wore a dark sweater beneath a heavy coat dusted with snowflakes. His eyes moved between the two women with quiet intensity. "Is everything all right?" he asked carefully. Olivia swallowed. "A funding issue. Nothing you need to worry about." Luke's gaze lingered on her face, reading the tension she tried to hide. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "How bad is it?" Diane hesitated, then sighed deeply. "Bad enough that we may have to shut down some programs." Luke nodded once, absorbing the blow with surprising gravity. He spoke softly, choosing his words with care. "If there's anything I can do—" "There isn't," Olivia interrupted gently, "but thank you." Their eyes met. The connection was brief, but full of something unspoken, something warm, something dangerous. He lowered his gaze for a moment, nodding again. "All right, if you're sure." Olivia called after him as he turned to leave. "Luke!" He looked back, and the room seemed to inhale with her. "Thank you for caring," she said softly. A faint smile brushed his lips, lingering only for her. "I care more than you think." He left before she could answer. Later that afternoon, the sky darkened prematurely, casting long shadows across the community centre. Olivia moved quickly from room to room, trying to distract herself with tasks. She rewrote schedules, rearranged supply shelves, and double-checked the pantry inventory. But her mind drifted constantly to the closed door of Diane's office and the crushing blow of the vanished donation. She paused by the classroom, where a volunteer struggled to keep a handful of energetic children focused. Before she could join them, a voice called her name. "Liv!" Malik trudged toward her, shoulders hunched against the cold that had followed him indoors. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, his face unusually pale. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "My mom got a notice about the heating bill," he said quietly. "They might shut it off. I tried to tell her I'd work after school, but she said no." Olivia's heart tightened. Malik was too young for such burdens. "We'll help," she said firmly. "We'll figure something out." He nodded, but worry clouded his eyes. Olivia reached out and squeezed his shoulder gently. Malik leaned into the touch for the briefest moment before straightening and nodding again. Then Luke appeared behind them. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone calm but alert. Malik stiffened, embarrassed. Olivia stepped in quickly. "It's fine. Just a personal matter." Luke knelt beside Malik, not wanting to tower over him. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "you can tell me too." Malik blinked in surprise. "Why would you help me?" Luke offered a small, genuine smile. "Because people helped me once, and because you matter." The boy looked away, fighting emotion before muttering, "Thanks," and hurrying down the hall. Olivia exhaled slowly. "You're good with him." Luke rose to his full height, his expression softening. "I just see someone who reminds me of myself at his age." She tilted her head slightly, searching his eyes. "You don't talk much about yourself." His gaze flickered with a shadow that passed too quickly to read. "I'm better at listening." He stepped closer, and the air between them shifted. There was warmth in the way he looked at her, a tenderness he didn't try to hide. Their proximity felt like a pull, like gravity deciding things for them. "You shouldn't carry everything alone," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't be," he replied, his voice low and sincere. For a moment her world narrowed to the warmth in his eyes, to the softness in his voice, to the unspoken promise that seemed to settle in the space between them. Olivia took a step back, her heart racing. "I need to check the food delivery." Luke nodded, but his expression betrayed something deeper, something worried. Later that evening, with the sky turned dark and the centre slowly emptying, Olivia stepped outside to bring in the trash bins. The cold wrapped around her like a warning. Streetlights flickered on, casting pale circles of light on the snow. She bent to lift a bin, her breath clouding the air. A voice cut through the silence. "Olivia!" She turned sharply. Luke approached from the alley's entrance, his coat unbuttoned, the wind tugging at the hem. He looked serious, more serious than she had seen him all week. His steps were quick, determined. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I saw someone across the street earlier," he said slowly. "Someone watching the building. I thought it was nothing at first, but—" He exhaled, the breath trembling. "Please tell me if anything strange happens." Olivia frowned. "Luke, this neighborhood isn't perfect, but we're used to unfamiliar faces. You don't need to worry." He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a tone that made her heart tremble. "I do worry." She froze. He took her hand gently, almost reverently, as if afraid she might pull away. The warmth of his palm sank through her gloves, through her skin, straight into her chest. "You matter to this place," he whispered. "You matter to me. I don't want anything harming that." Olivia's breath faltered. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. The sincerity in his eyes stole her words. "Luke," she whispered. Snowflakes drifted between them like tiny sparks of light. He lifted her hand and brushed his thumb lightly over the back of it. "You don't have to pretend you're made of steel," he said softly. "I can see when something hurts you." For a long, fragile moment they stood in silence. The world around them faded, leaving only the warmth of his touch and the pull of something neither of them could resist. Olivia finally pulled her hand back, but she did it slowly, gently, unwilling to break the connection too abruptly. "Thank you for caring," she whispered. Luke nodded, though his eyes remained locked on hers, with an emotion that tightened her breath. "Any time," he murmured. She had to look away. The intensity was too much, too close to a truth she wasn't ready to face. Inside, the center felt warmer somehow, quieter, as if carrying the echo of the moment they had just shared. But Olivia forced herself to keep walking, pushing away the lingering tremor in her hands, the heat that remained under her skin, and the realization that Luke's presence had begun to seep into the spaces she guarded most fiercely. She tried to focus on locking up and turning off the lights, but she could still feel the imprint of his touch, still hear his voice, still sense the promise hidden in the way he had looked at her in the cold. And no matter how she tried, she could not forget it. The winter storm arrived before dawn, rolling over Chicago like a restless ocean of grey. By the time Olivia Bennet reached the community center, the sidewalks were hidden beneath a thick layer of snow that crunched sharply under her boots. The sky was a muted white, so heavy it seemed to press against the rooftops. She pushed open the entrance door and felt the cold follow her inside, as if the storm refused to let her escape. The heater had failed again. Warm air barely seeped through the vents, and the building felt like a refrigerator. Olivia rubbed her hands together, wishing she had worn a thicker coat. But today was their emergency shelter evening, the night when families in crisis came seeking warmth and temporary refuge. Normally they relied on donated blankets, portable heaters, and endless pots of soup. But today, everything felt fragile. Even the lights flickered occasionally, casting long, trembling shadows across the hallway. She set her bag down and headed straight for the kitchen, determined to start preparations early. As she reached for the light switch, footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, and there he was. Luke. He stepped inside the hallway with snow still clinging to his hair and lashes. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his breath carried the crisp scent of winter. He looked at her in a way that warmed the icy corridor instantly. "You're here early," Olivia said softly. "I figured you would be," he replied, offering a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "And I didn't want you facing the storm alone." His voice had a warmth that wrapped around her like a shield. She swallowed, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. "The heater's barely working," she warned him. He removed his gloves, revealing hands already reddened by the cold. "Then we'll work twice as hard." They began preparing the dining hall together. Luke carried tables, his movements sure and strong, while Olivia arranged chairs and checked the supply lists. Every so often their hands brushed. Every time, the small contact sent a tension through her that she struggled to hide. Children arrived first, stomping snow from their boots. Then came mothers with bundled toddlers, fathers with anxious eyes, seniors whose clothes were too thin for the weather. Olivia welcomed each one with soft words and encouraging smiles, even as the cold seeped deeper into her bones. Luke noticed. He stepped behind her at one point, his voice low near her ear. "Are you warm enough?" She stiffened slightly at the closeness. His breath tickled the corner of her jaw. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You always say that," he murmured. The intimacy in his tone shook her. She turned quickly, breaking the moment before her heart gave too much away. Hours passed in a blur of motion. Olivia ladled steaming soup into bowls until her wrists ached. Luke handed out blankets, kneeling to wrap one gently around an elderly man's shoulders. The soft gratitude in the man's eyes made something inside Luke melt. When a young mother dropped her grocery bags and cans rolled in every direction, Luke knelt beside her, gathering the items with slow, reassuring hands. "You're safe here," he told her, his voice soft. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Olivia watched him from across the room. Something warm bloomed inside her, spreading slowly through her chest. Luke was not a man who blended into backgrounds. He brought presence with him, even in silence, but what captivated her was his kindness, the subtle, quiet gestures that showed a heart shaped by something more than pride or appearance. Later, when the families began to settle on makeshift bedding, Olivia leaned against the wall, exhausted. She felt her knees tremble and reached out to steady herself, but her hand slipped. Luke caught her elbow and guided her gently to one of the smaller hallways, away from the noise and movement. "Sit for a moment," he urged. "I can't," she whispered, letting out a shaky breath. "There's too much to do." "Everyone is settled for now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me help you." She obeyed, lowering herself onto a bench. He crouched in front of her, close enough that she could see every detail of his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the softness of his gaze, the way his breath rose in faint clouds in the cold air. "You're exhausted," he murmured. "I'm all right," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Olivia, your hands are shaking." She didn't deny it. She simply exhaled slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of the day. Luke reached for her hands, hesitating just long enough to let her pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. He wrapped her trembling fingers inside his palms. Warmth spread instantly, not from temperature, but from the feeling of being held, gently, reverently, as though she mattered more than she allowed herself to believe. "Breathe," he whispered. Olivia's chest rose with a slow inhale. His thumbs brushed softly across the back of her hands, a gesture filled with tenderness. The hallway lights flickered, throwing golden shadows across his face. She stared at their joined hands, and something inside her cracked open. "Luke," she murmured, lifting her eyes to his. He leaned closer, not enough to touch her fully, but enough that she felt his presence like a force. His voice lowered into something rough, intimate. "I'm here," he whispered. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her heart thudded painfully. The world around them blurred. The muffled sounds of sleeping families seemed far away. Only Luke mattered, only the warmth of his hands, only the soft tremble in his breath. He lifted one hand slowly, touching her cheek with the back of his fingers. The contact was feather-light, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch. "Olivia?" he murmured. "Look at me." She did. Their eyes locked. Her breath caught. His gaze fell to her lips. Time stilled. He leaned in, slowly, carefully. As though she were something precious he did not dare break. Olivia felt her heartbeat in her throat. Her fingers tightened around his, her lips parted in a soft inhale. Then his mouth touched hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a whisper of warmth and longing, a soft, almost searching caress that felt like a question. Olivia answered with a trembling sigh, leaning into him as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. Luke's hand slid to her jaw, holding her as if she were something sacred. The kiss deepened, still soft, still careful, but filled with a tenderness that stole her breath. Her heart pounded wildly. Her hands moved to the front of his sweater, gripping the fabric lightly, pulling him closer. His chest pressed against her knees as he shifted, his breath mingling with hers, their lips meeting again in slow, aching rhythm. When they finally parted, neither spoke. Their foreheads brushed, their breaths mixed in warm bursts of air. Olivia felt fragile and alive all at once. Luke's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry if that was too much." She shook her head, her breath trembling. It wasn't. He cupped her cheek fully now, his thumb brushing beneath her eye in a way that made her entire body melt. "I have wanted to kiss you for days," he confessed softly. "Every time you look at me, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." Olivia's pulse raced. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "I feel it too." He exhaled a deep, shaky breath, as though the words affected him more than he could hide. "Tell me what you need," he whispered. She hesitated, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intimacy of the moment. She touched his wrist gently, drawing his hand down to her chest, letting him feel the rapid beat of her heart. "I just need you. Right here," she said softly. Luke's expression softened into something breathtaking. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead, slow, lingering, filled with reverence. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. Olivia closed her eyes, sinking into the warmth of his promise. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly held, not just physically, but emotionally, deeply, completely. A sudden noise down the hall startled them apart. A flicker of lights followed, reminding them of where they were, of the responsibilities waiting. Luke stood and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's take care of everyone." She slipped her hand into his. The warmth remained even after they stepped into the cold hallway, and though they spoke of soup and blankets and duties, their hearts still echoed with the memory of the kiss that had changed something neither of them could undo. The morning after the emergency shelter night arrived, with a cold so sharp, it felt alive. Chicago's wind rushed fiercely along the streets, scraping frost from windows and sending clouds of powdery snow into spinning whirls. Olivia Bennet wrapped her scarf tighter as she approached the community center, her chest still tender from the memory of the kiss she and Luke had shared in the dim hallway. That kiss lived beneath her ribs like a quiet flame, warming her even now as she pushed open the main door. Inside, the center buzzed with a nervous energy. Something felt different. Conversations were hushed, glances were exchanged, and a strange tension hovered in the air like an unspoken warning. Olivia set her bag on the counter and scanned the lobby. "Morning," she called to a group of volunteers sorting canned goods. Two of them looked up and smiled politely, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Olivia frowned. She had learned to recognize when a storm was brewing inside these walls, and today that storm seemed ready to break. Before she could ask what was going on, she heard laughter, sharp, mocking laughter, coming from the hallway near the tutoring room. It was Malik's voice, but strained, defensive. "You're imagining things," Malik said angrily. "Am not," another teenager argued. "Look, it's all over the internet." Olivia's pulse jumped. She hurried toward the voices and found Malik standing beside a boy from the neighborhood. The boy held his phone up triumphantly, the screen glowing with a blurred photo beneath a bold headline. "Missing billionaire known as the Dubai Maharaja, still not found." Olivia felt the ground shift beneath her. The headline alone rattled her, but something else made her breath catch. The faint outline of the man in the photo, the shape of the shoulders, the posture, the tilt of the head. No, it couldn't be. Malik looked up and saw her standing there. His expression instantly shifted from anger to worry. "Miss Olivia, it's nothing. He's just being stupid." The other boy scoffed. "I'm telling you, that guy looks just like the man working here." Olivia forced herself to stay calm. "Enough," she said softly. "Phones away. Focus on your tutoring." The boy grumbled, but obeyed. Malik lingered, his shoulders tight. When the other teen walked off, Malik approached her. "I didn't mean to start anything," he whispered. "He showed me that picture and said it looked like Luke. I told him Luke isn't some billionaire. He's just Luke." Olivia swallowed hard. "You did nothing wrong." But her heart pounded violently in her chest. She walked away quickly, her mind racing. The resemblance in the picture could have been a coincidence. The headline meant nothing. Luke had never implied anything extraordinary about himself. He lived simply. He dressed plainly. He worked tirelessly. Everything about him said he was a man rebuilding his life, not a man whose wealth could swallow the world. So why did her doubts feel so heavy? She sought refuge in the supply room, leaning against the shelves. Her breath came unevenly. She pressed her palm to her forehead. "Olivia!" She opened her eyes. Luke stood in the doorway, his face etched with concern. Snow still clung to his hair, and the crisp cold clung to his clothes, making him appear almost unreal in the dim room. "You're trembling," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Are you all right?" She shook her head before she could gather the courage to lie. "There's something happening. A rumor." Luke's expression shifted instantly. A flicker of fear, real fear, crossed his eyes. "What kind of rumor?" She hesitated. "Some of the teens saw a news headline, a missing billionaire." Luke went still, completely, utterly still. Olivia stared at him, her breath shaking. "The picture. It looked a little like you." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hadn't meant to reveal how much the idea frightened her. The thought of Luke being someone she didn't fully know threatened the fragile connection blooming between them. Luke exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. For a moment, his eyes held a storm she couldn't decipher. Then he stepped forward, reaching for her hand with gentle urgency. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "I am here. With you. That is the only truth that matters right now." His fingers cupped her cheek before she could stop him. Warmth, reverence, need, the kind of touch that felt like a confession. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, allowing herself one moment of surrender. The warmth of his palm, the tenderness in his voice, the silent promise he carried in every gesture. But when she opened her eyes again, she saw the fear he could not hide, the shadows beneath his calm, the tension in his shoulders. "You're not telling me something," she whispered. He withdrew his hand slowly, as though it hurt him to let her go. "There are parts of my past I don't want to bring into your world," he said quietly. "Not because I want to lie, but because I don't want to hurt you." Her heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "Luke, I want to trust you." His eyes softened, filling with longing. "Then trust what you see in front of you." He stepped closer once more, his forehead nearly touching hers. His breath warmed her lips. She felt her pulse race wildly, her knees weakening. "Tell me you trust me," he whispered. She inhaled a shaky breath. "I trust you," she said softly, "but I'm scared." He rested his hand on the back of her neck, steady and warm. "So am I." The confession stunned her. Luke, afraid. She felt him tremble just slightly, and her heart tightened with compassion. She lifted a hand to his chest, her palm resting over his heartbeat. "Talk to me," she murmured. His eyes closed for a moment. Then he stepped back, the distance between them sudden and sharp. "I cannot explain everything today," he said, his voice pained. "Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know how." The ache in his words pulled at her, but before she could respond, Diane appeared in the doorway. "Olivia," the director said urgently, "I need you, now." Olivia startled, tearing her gaze away from Luke. What happened? Our meeting with the district representative has been moved up, Diane said. We need the revised files ready in 10 minutes. Olivia nodded, then turned to Luke once more. His expression was unreadable, a war of emotions hiding beneath a mask he struggled to maintain. We're not done with this conversation, she whispered. A flicker of longing crossed his eyes. I hope not. He stepped aside, letting her pass. As she headed toward Diane's office, she felt Luke's gaze on her back, warm, heavy, filled with something unspoken. Yet when she reached the corner, she glanced over her shoulder. He was gone. The meeting with the district representative was brutal. The man questioned their funding requests, their attendance logs, their program efficiency. He spoke with the cold detachment of someone who had never set foot in a shelter during a winter storm. Diane defended their work with exhaustion lining her features, while Olivia presented their revised files with unwavering determination. But the representative's eyes glimmered with condescension. You're asking for funding the city simply doesn't have, he said. It isn't for us, Olivia replied sharply. It's for the community. He offered a thin smile. I will consider it. The words meant nothing. Olivia knew it. Diane knew it. When the meeting ended and the representative left, Olivia sagged against the wall, drained. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up. Luke stood there. He didn't speak. He simply opened his arms slightly, not touching her, not presuming, just offering. Her breath caught. She took one step toward him, then another. When she reached him, he placed one hand gently on her lower back and the other on her upper arm, guiding her closer. She rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known, he whispered into her hair. Olivia closed her eyes. Tears prickled at the corners, but she held them back. His touch, his warmth, his quiet presence, everything about him felt like an anchor in the storm. She lifted her head slightly, her face inches from his. Luke, who are you? His breath caught, and for a moment she saw something raw in his eyes, something that terrified him more than anything else. Someone called from down the hallway. Breaking the moment, Luke released her slowly, reluctantly, but before she could step back fully, his fingers brushed the side of her jaw. I am a man trying very hard to deserve you, he murmured. The words stole her breath. She opened her mouth to respond, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. Save it, he whispered, for when I have the courage to tell you everything. He stepped away before she could stop him, before she could pull him back. And as he disappeared down the hallway, Olivia felt the first true crack of fear inside her heart. Not fear of him, fear of losing him, fear of truths she wasn't ready to confront. Fear of how deeply she was already falling for a man wrapped in shadows. A man who kissed her like she was the first warm thing he had touched in years. A man who looked at her as though she were the only truth he had left. The storm did not return the next day, but the cold sharpened, sweeping across Chicago with an icy determination that seeped into every doorway and every corner of the city. Olivia Bennett arrived at the community center before sunrise, her boots crunching over frozen slush as soft grey light broke through the clouds. Her breath curled into the air in pale spirals. She tried to steady herself, but her heart beat unsteadily, weighed down by the memory of Luke's haunted eyes the day before. She unlocked the front door, flicked on the hallway lights, and stood still as the fluorescent bulbs hummed to life. The building felt heavier today, full of unspoken tensions and truths knocking from beneath the surface. She placed her bag on the counter and closed her eyes for a moment. She wanted peace. She wanted clarity. She wanted Luke. But most of all, she wanted the trembling concern she had seen in him yesterday to make sense. The quiet morning didn't last long. Volunteers trickled in one by one, stomping snow from their shoes, shaking off the cold. Olivia forced herself to smile, to greet them, to seem steady and centered. But the truth pressed against her ribs like a secret asking to be spoken. Around mid-morning, Malik burst through the front door, his cheeks pink from the cold. He sprinted across the lobby, skidding to a stop in front of her. "Miss Olivia!" he gasped. "He's in trouble!" Fear sliced through her. She dropped the stack of forms she was holding. "Who? Malik? What happened?" "Luke," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He's outside. Some guy was waiting for him on the corner. They were arguing loudly." She didn't hesitate. She rushed past Malik, past the volunteers, pushing open the front door so quickly that the cold slapped her face with unforgiving force. Snowflakes drifted slowly now, delicate flakes floating down like suspended breath. She saw them immediately. Luke stood on the sidewalk, shoulders tensed, facing a sharply dressed man whose overcoat alone probably cost more than the centre's monthly utilities. The man's hair was slicked back with precision, and his posture screamed authority. His expression was cold, calculating, almost triumphant. Olivia approached slowly, her pulse thundering in her ears. Luke's jaw was clenched, his breath visible in the frigid air. When he noticed her, something raw flashed across his eyes. Fear, longing, regret. "Olivia," he said softly. The suited man turned, assessing her with cool curiosity. His gaze dipped from her coat to her boots, as though cataloguing her worth in a single glance. "And this," he said lightly, "must be the reason you're refusing to come back." Luke stiffened. "Stop." The man raised an eyebrow. "You disappear for months, the entire board panics, your name floods the media, your investors scream for blood, and here you are, playing volunteer in a rundown community centre." Olivia's breath caught. A tremor ran through her. She looked at Luke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What is he talking about?" Luke exhaled slowly, pain flickering across his features. "Olivia, please, not here." The man ignored him. He stepped closer, removing a leather glove with unnecessary flair. "I suppose you know him as Luke, but that isn't his name." Every beat of Olivia's heart echoed like a drum. The man slipped a folded newspaper from his coat and held it out. A picture covered the front page. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Missing billionaire Luke Harrington, presumed dead after disappearance of nearly 3 months. Olivia's breath left her in a shattered rush. The name struck her like a blow. Luke Harrington, the Dubai Maharaja, the missing billionaire whose face had appeared on Malik's phone the day before. She lifted her eyes slowly. Luke stood frozen, his expression bleeding with sorrow. No excuses, no denial, just truth, cold and human and heartbreaking. "I wanted to tell you," he whispered. "I swear I did." The man scoffed. "He vanished after a scandal that nearly burned the empire to the ground. The media has been salivating for months. And your lovely community hero here?" He gestured toward Luke with a dismissive hand. "He ran, left everything. Reputation destroyed, partners furious. A kingdom collapsing without its king." Luke's jaw tightened. "This is not the place." "No," the man replied, "but it seems you chose the wrong place to hide." A wave of heat washed through Olivia, clashing violently with the cold air. She pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. "You lied to me," she whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Luke stepped toward her, desperation shining in his eyes. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing," she whispered, voice trembling. "No," he insisted, his voice breaking. "I didn't hide from you. I hid from the world. I hid because I was drowning. I hid because I didn't know how to breathe anymore." The suited man smirked. "Drowning in luxury. What a tragedy." Luke turned on him fiercely. "You don't know anything about what happened." "Oh, I know more than you realize." the man replied, slipping his glove back on. "But the truth, dear Olivia, is simple. This man is not who you think he is." Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. She backed away, needing air, needing distance, needing space between her heart and the truth that threatened to shatter it. The man gave Luke a cold smile. "You have until tomorrow, then we go public." Luke's breath stilled. "You wouldn't." "You abandoned an empire," the man replied. "Now you'll face the consequences." He turned and walked away, his polished shoes crunching the snow with arrogant precision. Olivia stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Luke took a step toward her. "Olivia, please." The raw emotion in his voice pulled at every fragile part of her. She trembled, but did not move. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew who you were. You knew what this would mean. And you chose to hide it from me." "I didn't want this world touching you," he pleaded. "I didn't want the scandals, the paparazzi, the accusations. I didn't want the weight of my mistakes falling on your shoulders. I could have handled the truth." He looked at her, pain tightening every line of his face. "I'm not sure I could." The wind swept between them, cold and merciless. "Olivia," he said, his voice cracking, "everything I feel for you is real. Every moment, every touch, every word." She closed her eyes, fighting tears, but it wasn't built on truth. He took another step. She stepped back. The distance sliced through him. "Tell me what to do," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Tell me how to fix this." She shook her head slowly. "I need time." The words cut both of them, sharp and deep. Luke inhaled shakily. "I will give you whatever you need, but please, don't walk away." "I'm not walking away," she whispered, though her heart threatened to collapse. "I'm trying to breathe." Her voice faltered. She brushed past him gently, unable to stand under the weight of his gaze. She walked toward the community center, her steps slow, heavy, full of trembling sorrow. Luke remained on the sidewalk, standing alone in the falling snow, watching her disappear through the door. His breath fogged in the air, his chest rising and falling with painful intensity. Inside, Olivia closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her hand pressed to her heart. She felt its frantic beating against her palm, felt the ache expanding, felt the tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She slid down the door until she sat on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She loved him. She had not said it aloud, not even to herself. But the truth echoed inside her with terrifying clarity. She loved him, and he was a man built on shadows and truths too heavy for the quiet world she lived in. Olivia let her forehead rest against her knees, her breath trembling as the weight of everything settled around her. Outside, on the other side of the door, Luke stood under the soft fall of snow, his heart breaking in ways he had not believed possible. And for the first time since he had vanished from his empire, Luke Harrington felt truly lost. Snow fell again that night, blanketing Chicago in a hush so deep it felt as though the city were holding its breath. Streetlights cast soft halos over the drifting flakes, and the world seemed slower, gentler, almost fragile. But inside Olivia Bennet's apartment, warmth could not reach her. She sat curled at the edge of her couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her thoughts circling in the same agonizing loop. Luke Harrington. The name tasted foreign in her mind, strange, heavy, too large for the quiet man who had swept floors with her, lifted boxes beside her, kissed her with trembling tenderness in a dim hallway. Luke Harrington, billionaire. Luke Harrington, missing heir. Luke Harrington, liar. Her chest tightened with every thought, each one cutting into the next. She closed her eyes, pressing the heels of her palms against her forehead as if she could push the pain back into silence. But the memory of his voice, broken, pleading, refused to fade. "I am a man trying very hard to deserve you." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, angry at herself for feeling so much. The knock at her door startled her. She froze. Her heart thudded. She stood slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and walked to the door. Her breath trembled as she opened it. Luke stood in the hallway. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting in small rivulets down the collar of his coat. His eyes were red, not from the cold, but from something far deeper. His chest rose and fell unevenly, as though he had run across the city just to reach her. "Olivia," he whispered, voice breaking on her name. Her hand tightened on the doorknob. "Luke, you shouldn't be here." His expression crumpled, the pain unmistakable. "I know. But I could not stay away." She stepped back reflexively, and the small movement sliced through him like a blade. "I just needed to see you," he said softly, "to explain, to give you the truth you deserve." Olivia swallowed hard. "The truth should not come after the fact, Luke." He flinched. "You're right." The hallway fell silent, thick with tension. Snow melting in slow droplets around his boots. He took a shaky breath. "Will you let me in?" Her heart felt trapped between longing and defense. She opened the door wider, stepping aside without a word. Luke entered slowly, as though afraid any sudden movement would make her vanish. Olivia closed the door behind them, but she didn't step closer. She stayed near the entrance, arms crossed tightly around her body, her eyes wary. Luke removed his gloves with trembling fingers. "Thank you." Her voice came out soft, guarded. "Talk." He inhaled deeply, looking at her the way a man looks at the last, steady thing in a collapsing world. "I did not disappear because I wanted to abandon my life," he said, stepping closer but still keeping distance. "I disappeared because I could not breathe inside it." She said nothing. "My father built an empire that was never meant for a person like me," Luke continued quietly. "I was born into a world where weakness is unacceptable, where appearances matter more than truth, where every mistake becomes a weapon." His jaw tightened, his voice dropping. "And I made a mistake, one that cost me everything." Olivia's breath caught, but she waited. He looked away for a moment, swallowing hard. "I trusted the wrong partner, a man who said he would help expand our foundation work. He siphoned money, falsified documents, and framed me. By the time I realized, the media had already decided I was guilty." Olivia's eyes widened. Her heart pounded with confusion and sorrow. "I tried to fight it," he said, voice breaking. "But every move I made buried me deeper. Every interview twisted my words. Every denial was painted as deception." He looked at her again, and she felt the rawness in his gaze like a touch. "So I left," he whispered. "Not because I was ashamed, but because I was drowning, because no matter how loudly I spoke, no one listened." He took one slow step toward her. "Until you." Olivia's breath trembled. "You believed in me without knowing anything about me," he said softly. "You saw who I am, not who the world decided I was." A tear escaped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. "I hid my identity because I needed to be someone real with you, somewhere real, for the first time in my life." Her chest ached. She felt the truth pouring from him, heavy and trembling, and it cracked something inside her. "Luke," she whispered. He lifted his hand slightly, not touching her, just reaching toward the space between them. "When you look at me, Olivia, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a headline. I'm not a scandal." His fingers shook. "I'm a man who found peace in your presence, a man who learned how to breathe again because of you." The words pulled her toward him, step by step, driven by instinct more than thought. She stopped inches away from him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to breathe in the scent of snow melting on his coat. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth sooner?" she whispered. His voice broke. "Because I didn't believe I deserved you." Her breath caught sharply. "And because," he continued, "I knew that as soon as I told you, I would lose the only part of my life that felt pure." Olivia closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. When she opened them again, she met his gaze fully. "You should have told me," she said softly but firmly. He nodded, tears glistening. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I only want you to know that nothing between us was a lie. Not my feelings, not my intentions, not one single moment." His voice trembled. "If you want me to leave, I will. But I needed you to know the truth from me, not from a headline." Olivia studied him, her heart torn between hurt and longing. Luke looked undone, strong but fragile, confident but broken open. A man stripped of every mask. "Come here," she whispered suddenly. Luke inhaled sharply, as if the words had pulled air back into his lungs. He stepped forward until he stood right in front of her, close enough for their breath to mingle. She lifted her hands to his face, her thumbs brushing lightly over his cheeks. He trembled under her touch, closing his eyes as if her hands were a balm he had been waiting for. "Look at me," she murmured. He opened his eyes slowly. The vulnerability in them made her chest tighten. "Do you still feel the same?" she whispered. His breath broke. "I feel more." She swallowed. "Then kiss me." The words fell from her lips with a softness that shook them both. Luke leaned in slowly, reverently, as if approaching something sacred. His hands rose to her waist. Trembling as they settled there, Olivia felt her pulse race, her breath catching. Their lips met. The kiss was not desperate or wild. It was aching, slow, deep, a confession in the shape of a touch. Luke kissed her with a tenderness that unraveled every piece of her, his thumbs tracing the sides of her waist, his breath mingling with hers in fragile sighs. Olivia kissed him back, her hands sliding into his hair, feeling the melting snow dampen her fingers. His forehead pressed to hers between kisses, his breath trembling, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I lost you," he murmured. "You almost did," she breathed, brushing her nose against his. "But I'm still here." He kissed her again, softer this time, as if sealing a truth between them. When they finally parted, their foreheads rested together. Olivia's hands remained on his cheeks. Luke's arms encircled her waist with gentle certainty. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered. "Not to talk, not to explain, just stay." Luke closed his eyes, a tear slipping free. "Anything," he whispered, "anything you want." And as the snow outside thickened into a gentle, unending fall, they held each other in the quiet warmth of a truth finally spoken. Not everything was healed, not everything was resolved, but they were no longer standing on opposite sides of silence. They were together, and neither one wanted to let go. Chapter 9. The day the world knocked on their door, morning arrived slowly, as though the sun hesitated to rise over Chicago after the night that had changed everything. Soft gold filtered through Olivia Bennet's curtains, brushing over the small apartment in warm strokes. The world outside was silent beneath a thick layer of fresh snow, the kind that softened street sounds and made the city feel like a private universe. Olivia woke before Luke did. She lay still for a moment, watching him breathe. He slept on his side, facing her, his dark hair tousled, his features relaxed in a way she had never seen before. Without the tension he wore in public, without the weight of his secrets pressing on him, Luke Harrington looked younger, fragile even, a man who had lived too long in the shadows, finally finding a moment of light. Her heart ached with tenderness. She reached out slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Her fingertip barely touched him, but he stirred anyway, lashes fluttering before his eyes opened. He smiled when he saw her. It was a soft, unguarded smile that melted her completely. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," she murmured, her cheeks warming. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with slow, deliberate care. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Are you?" His smile faded into something deeper. "I am, because you're here." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the back of it with a tenderness that sent heat rushing to her chest. She curled closer to him, resting her forehead against his. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "I know," he replied softly, "but I'll walk through every fear with you." For a long moment they stayed like that, breathing each other in, warmth weaving slowly through the cold morning air. It was a fragile peace, delicate as glass, beautiful as the first breath after a long winter, but peace was rarely allowed to linger. A loud, sharp pounding rattled the front door. Olivia jumped. Luke sat up instantly, every muscle tensing, as though he had been trained all his life to react this way. His breath stilled, and something dark flickered through his eyes. "Stay here," he said quietly. "No," she whispered, terrified by the sudden shift in him. "Luke, what if—" He placed a gentle hand on her cheek, calming her despite his own fear. "No one will hurt you. I promise." He slid out of the bed, pulling his shirt back on with quick movements before crossing the room. Olivia wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and followed him into the hallway, her pulse thundering. The pounding came again. Luke hesitated for only a breath before opening the door. A tall woman in a tailored coat stood on the threshold. Snowflakes clung to her lashes and dark curls. Her expression was sharp, intelligent, and unreadable. Behind her stood the same suited man who had confronted Luke yesterday. Olivia's stomach dropped. The man smirked when he saw Luke. "We warned you." The woman stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Luke." Luke inhaled a slow, tight breath. "Amara." The name froze Olivia. Amara Harrington, Luke's older sister. Olivia recognized her from distant magazine covers and headlines she had never paid attention to until yesterday. The woman's voice held authority, layered with exhaustion. "May we come in?" Luke hesitated, then stepped aside reluctantly. Olivia retreated into the living room, heart pounding. Amara's gaze flicked briefly over her, assessing, measuring, calculating. Not cruel, not condescending, simply processing the truth of what she saw. A woman in a blanket, standing very close to her missing brother. The suited man closed the door behind them and folded his hands. Luke crossed his arms, his jaw set. "What do you want?" Luke asked, keeping himself between Olivia and the newcomers as though shielding her. Amara removed her gloves slowly. "To talk." Luke laughed under his breath, the sound hollow. "You never fly across the country just to talk." Amara's expression softened in a way that surprised both Olivia and Luke. "You disappeared. For months. I thought you were dead. The world thought you were dead." Her voice cracked on the last word. Luke exhaled, breaking for a moment. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Her eyes glistened before the familiar steel returned. "Whether you meant to or not, you are still a Harrington, and your disappearance has consequences." Luke looked away, tension radiating off him. Olivia stepped closer instinctively, as though pulled by the invisible thread that now bound them. Luke reached for her hand without looking, finding her fingers and holding on as if she were the only steady thing in the room. Amara's gaze fell to their joined hands. Her throat tightened. "So, this is why you stayed hidden." Luke's voice grew quiet. "This is who saved me." The words hit Olivia like a wave, warm, overwhelming, terrifying. Her breath caught. Amara inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Luke, the board is collapsing. Investors are desperate. Accusations are spreading. We need damage control before everything your father built is destroyed." "I don't care about the Empire," he said sharply. You should, Amara shot back, because his legacy is yours. And if you let others control the narrative, you'll never escape the lies. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Luke's grip on Olivia tightened. I can't go back. Amara took a step toward him. Then at least tell your side before they bury you. The suited man added, a public statement, a controlled interview, clarify your innocence and expose the fraud. Luke tensed, shaking his head. They won't believe me. They might, Amara said softly, if you fight. Olivia felt Luke's fear radiating through him, though he tried to mask it. She stepped closer, placing her free hand on his arm gently. Luke, she whispered, you don't have to face this alone. He closed his eyes briefly, turning toward her with an expression of raw vulnerability. Olivia, I came here to escape that world. I came to find something real. She swallowed. You did, and you're not losing it. The moment between them was so intimate, so deep, that Amara looked away, for the first time seeming less like a Harrington and more like a sister who had just realized her brother was in love. Luke exhaled shakily and faced his sister. What do you want me to do? Amara stepped forward slowly, her voice gentle now. Come home, just for a meeting, just long enough to stabilize things. Luke stiffened. I don't belong there anymore. Amara's voice softened further. You are my brother, and I am not leaving you lost in exile while vultures tear you apart. Luke's chest rose and fell with fractured breaths. He looked at Olivia, panicked, torn, searching her face for an anchor. Her voice came out steady, even though her heart trembled. You need to clean your name, Luke. His eyes widened with hurt, confusion, fear, then slowly softened into something like understanding. Olivia touched his cheek gently. Not for the Empire. Not for them. For you. His breath broke. He leaned into her hand, eyes closing briefly. I don't want to lose what we have. You won't, she whispered, but hiding from the truth will take you away from me more than facing it. Amara watched silently, her eyes reflecting a complex mix of relief, gratitude, and something close to awe. After a long moment, Luke inhaled deeply. All right, the suited man nodded crisply. Good, we leave in 1 hour. Olivia stiffened. 1 hour? Luke turned sharply. No, I'll go on my own time. Amara stepped forward. Luke, cameras and reporters are already gathering at our Chicago property. Word leaked that you might still be alive. Olivia's breath hitched. But how? Harrington News always leaks, Amara said bitterly. If you're seen here, they will swarm this building. They will invade this neighborhood. They will drag her into the fire with you. Luke's face went white. Olivia's pulse hammered. You need to leave immediately, Amara said, before the media arrives. Luke looked at Olivia as though the ground had vanished beneath him. Panic surged in his expression. I can't leave her. Not like this. Olivia stepped closer, taking his face gently in her hands. Her thumb brushed his cheek, steadier than her voice felt. You're not leaving me. You're protecting me. His hands came up to cover hers, his breath shaking. I don't want to go. I know, she whispered. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, eyes closed against the ache. I'm falling in love with you, he whispered suddenly, the confession slipping out like a truth too heavy to hold. Olivia gasped softly, her heart swelling painfully. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered back. Luke's breath trembled against her lips. Their kiss was soft, aching, full of fear and devotion, a goodbye that was not a goodbye, a promise made in silence. When they parted, Luke's voice broke. I'll come back for you no matter what happens. Olivia nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'll be here. Amara stepped forward gently. Luke, it's time. He took one step back, then another. Every inch tore through him. He turned toward the door slowly, as though gravity itself resisted. Before leaving, he looked at Olivia one last time, eyes shining with a love neither of them had expected, and a sorrow neither could escape. And then he was gone. Olivia stood frozen as the door closed softly behind him. Her hand rose to her lips, still trembling from the kiss. Her heart beat violently, painfully, fiercely. The snow outside kept falling, quiet and relentless, like the world refusing to forget what had just been torn apart. Olivia let herself sink onto the couch, tears streaming silently. She whispered into the empty room, her voice breaking with devotion. "Come back to me, Luke." And somewhere in the cold Chicago morning, Luke Harrington whispered back into the wind, "I will." Chicago lay beneath a gray, unmoving sky, the kind of winter sky that felt like a held breath. Olivia Bennet stood at the window of her apartment, fingers clutching her coffee mug as if it were the only warm thing left in her world. Snow dusted the glass, melting in tiny rivulets. Below, the street was quiet, too quiet, the silence almost unsettling. Luke had been gone only one day, but his absence pressed on her chest with a weight she could not escape. It felt as though the world had shifted without her consent, pulling him back into a life made of sharp lights and sharper judgments, a world she had never wanted to enter, and yet would do anything to protect him from. Her phone vibrated on the counter. A message from Diane. Emergency board meeting advancing. We might lose the youth program. Olivia closed her eyes. This was not the day she had hoped for, but there was no time for self-pity. The center needed her. The kids needed her. And if Luke had taught her anything, it was that running from storms only made them worse. She grabbed her coat and hurried outside, the cold slicing against her cheeks like glass. Her boots crunched on the icy sidewalk as she made her way toward the community center. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to slow down. Inside, the center was chaotic. Volunteers whispered in tense voices. Parents crowded the lobby. Malik sat near the door, bouncing his knee anxiously. When he saw her, he sprang up. "Miss Olivia, they're saying the program's going to be shut down, just like that. No warning." She placed her hands on his shoulders, steadying him. "I won't let that happen." He searched her eyes, hope trembling in his voice. "But you need help. You can't fight them alone." She forced a small smile. "I'm not alone." But as she walked toward Diane's office, she felt the sting of the unspoken truth. Luke was gone, and the world he came from could swallow him whole before he ever made it back to her. She shook the thought away. Focus. Diane sat behind her desk, hair pulled back tightly, her eyes red with exhaustion. "We have 10 minutes, she said without looking up. "The board is furious about the cancelled donation and the recent publicity. They think the center looks unstable. Because a billionaire walked past our building," Olivia snapped. Diane flinched. "Because a billionaire reportedly worked here. They're using the scandal to justify budget cuts." Olivia froze. Worked here. The truth stunned her. Had rumors spread so quickly? Had someone seen Luke volunteering and made assumptions? She pressed a hand to her chest. "This is my fault." "No," Diane said sharply. "This is the city choosing politics over people." Olivia stepped forward, voice steady. "Then let's fight back." Diane hesitated, then nodded. The meeting was held in a cramped conference room at city offices near the river. A long rectangular table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by board members whose expressions ranged from polite disapproval to open disdain. Papers shuffled, pens clicked. The cold air from the vents felt like judgment itself. Olivia stood tall. Diane stood beside her. An older board member cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, there are concerns over your facility's stability. Donor withdrawal, heating failures, an association with a high-profile missing person scandal." "He was a volunteer," Olivia cut in, her voice firm but respectful. "A good one. And our facility has weathered equipment failures with resourcefulness. The kids were never in danger." A woman with sharp glasses leaned forward. "And how do you explain the media interest surrounding your center? There are reports." "Reports," Olivia repeated calmly, "are not facts." The room paused. She continued, "What is a fact is that children rely on us. Families rely on us. We are the only safe space for several blocks. Cutting funding will not punish me. It will punish them." There was silence. A long, heavy silence. Then the board chair spoke. "We will take your arguments under advisement." The meeting ended without a verdict. As Olivia stepped outside into the frigid air, she felt a tremor run through her. She had fought fiercely, but the outcome remained uncertain, like snowflakes caught in a shifting wind. She turned down the street toward the train station when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her heartbeat quickened. She answered. "Olivia." Luke's voice. She stopped walking, breath freezing mid-air. "Where are you?" "In New York," he said quietly. "At the Harrington building. The media found out I'm alive." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Are you safe?" There was a pause. "Safe, yes, but everything is chaos. Cameras everywhere, investors demanding blood, lawyers asking me to sign statements I don't agree with." Her chest tightened painfully. "Luke, I needed to hear your voice," he murmured. "Everything feels wrong without it." Her eyes stung. "Come home." A soft exhale. "I will, but I need to clear my name first." "Tell me how I can help," she whispered. "You already have," he said. "You gave me a reason to fight." Her throat closed. She couldn't speak. "I have a public hearing in 2 hours," Luke continued. "The board wants me to deny involvement in the foundation scandal, to blame everything on my former partner, but there's more to the story." Olivia blinked. "More?" "Yes," he whispered. "And I didn't tell you because I thought it would make you see me differently." Her heartbeat quickened. "Tell me now." Luke inhaled deeply. "I didn't just trust the wrong partner. I defended him, publicly. I vouched for him. I put my reputation on the line for him, even when the numbers didn't add up." "But why?" she asked softly. His voice cracked. "Because he was my friend, and because I didn't want to believe my father had been right about him." Olivia closed her eyes, letting the truth settle. Luke's flaw was not arrogance, not greed, not deception. It was loyalty. Painful, tragic loyalty. "You made a mistake out of love," she whispered. Luke's breath trembled, "and it destroyed everything." "Not everything," she said gently. "Not you." Silence stretched between them, thick with emotion. "I have to go," Luke whispered. "They're calling me in." "Luke," she said softly. "Yes, I believe in you." The line was silent for a moment before he whispered, "Thank you." The call ended. Olivia lowered her phone slowly, gazing at the snowy street as though it could carry her prayers across state lines. "Be strong, Luke. Be brave. Be you." Hours later, she stood in the community center office, watching a live stream of Luke's hearing. Reporters crowded the hallway of the Harrington building. Cameras flashed. Security guards formed barricades. Luke stepped through the doorway. Olivia gasped. He wore a dark coat, his hair neatly combed back, his posture poised but tense. He looked every bit the heir to a business empire, but his eyes held the same quiet depth she had fallen for. He faced the microphones. "Luke Harrington," someone shouted. "Why did you disappear? Are the allegations true?" Luke inhaled deeply. "I left to protect my foundation from further damage and to prevent my family from being dragged into the scandal." I was overwhelmed, ashamed, and unsure of how to fight back. Reporters fired questions. Luke held up a hand. But I am here now, not to hide behind statements crafted for me, but to tell the truth. Olivia leaned forward, breath caught in her throat. My former partner betrayed the Harrington Foundation, Luke continued. He stole funds, manipulated documents, and left me to take the fall. And I helped him get away with it, not intentionally, but through my own blindness. The room erupted. Luke raised his voice over the chaos. I take responsibility for trusting the wrong person. But I will not take responsibility for crimes I did not commit. I intend to clear my name not through silence, but through full cooperation with investigators. His jaw tightened. And I want to say one more thing. Olivia clutched her chest. For months I lived as a ghost, and then I found a small community center in Chicago that reminded me who I really am. I found purpose. I found peace. He hesitated. I found someone who helped me remember how to breathe again. Gasps echoed through the room. Cameras clicked frantically. Luke stepped back, signaling the end of his statement. Olivia covered her mouth, a sob breaking through her chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He said it to the world. Diane burst into the office a moment later, breathless. Olivia, City Council just called. They're reinstating the youth program funding. They said your testimony today and the unexpected support from a public figure proved the center's value. Olivia's tears fell harder, but a smile broke through. Luke had protected her world, even while fighting for his own. That night, as Olivia walked home under falling snow, her phone vibrated again. A message. I'm coming home tomorrow. I love you. L. Her heart soared, full and trembling. She pressed the phone to her chest, whispering into the quiet night. I love you too. And above her, the snow drifted down gently, as though blessing the promise of two hearts fighting their way back to each other. 10 years later, Chicago was still the same city of sharp winters and stubborn beauty, but Olivia and Luke never walked its streets without feeling the weight of everything that had happened here. The city carried their history in its snowdrifts and sunsets, in the golden haze that settled over the lake each summer, in every corner that had witnessed their heartbreak and their healing. Olivia Harrington stood by the tall window of their townhouse overlooking Lincoln Park, watching soft flakes drift lazily through the air. Snow had always reminded her of Luke, of the day he vanished from her world, and the day he came back fighting for both of them. Winter no longer frightened her. It reminded her of love that refused to collapse under pressure. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of small footsteps. "Mom?" She turned to see their daughter, 8-year-old Amelia Grace Harrington, wrapped in a cardigan 2 sizes too big, her curls escaping in wild spirals. She had Luke's deep, thoughtful eyes and Olivia's stubborn warmth. "Yes, sweetheart?" Olivia asked, smiling. "Dad said we can go to the community center after dinner. Is that true?" "It is," Olivia said, brushing a curl behind Amelia's ear. "He wants to check on the new library wing." Amelia grinned and ran off toward the kitchen where her father was making cocoa. The community center, her center, had grown into something she never could have imagined. After Luke cleared his name, he donated generously but anonymously for years, refusing to let the center become a publicity piece. Instead, he worked quietly with Olivia, helping expand programs, fund tutoring, and renovate old rooms that once barely had heating. Over time, other donors joined, inspired not by extravagance, but by purpose. Now, the center served hundreds of children every week, offering mentorships, apprenticeships, and support services across the neighborhood. Olivia had become not just its heart, but its anchor, its vision carrier, the woman whose kindness had built a legacy more enduring than wealth. From the kitchen, she heard Luke's voice, warm, teasing. "No, you cannot put 4 marshmallows in 1 cup. That's chaos, Emmy." "It's not chaos if it tastes good," Amelia protested. Olivia smiled, her heart softening as she walked toward them. Luke Harrington stood by the stove, stirring a pot of cocoa, a few streaks of silver now woven through his dark hair. Time had made him more striking, but also gentler. His eyes no longer carried the shadows of a hunted man. They held peace. They held joy. They held the love he'd fought for. When he saw Olivia, his smile spread slowly, intimately, the same smile that had undone her a decade ago. "There you are," he murmured, brushing a kiss to her temple. "Here I am," she whispered back. His hand slid into hers easily, naturally, as though it had been crafted for that purpose. Their love had not weakened with time. It had deepened, weathered storms, handled disagreements, survived hectic work schedules, childhood fevers, board meetings, family crises, and the occasional media flashback. But every winter, they returned to one simple truth. They chose each other, every day, every year, every season. Luke poured cocoa into mugs and passed Amelia hers, then handed one to Olivia. "We should head out soon. The ceremony starts at 6. Olivia nodded. Today they were inaugurating the Harrington Learning Wing, named not for Luke, as the board had insisted, but for his late mother, Margaret Harrington, a woman whose generosity Luke had inherited, but never flaunted. The wing focused on scholarships, literacy, and educational support, a program built entirely from their shared dreams. Before they left, Olivia paused at the hallway mirror. She saw reflections layered like memories, the woman she had been a decade ago, tired, hopeful, wounded, brave, and the woman she was now, rooted, fulfilled, and still tender enough to feel gratitude every time she looked at Luke. He caught her staring and stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. "That I never imagined any of this," she said softly. His lips touched her shoulder. "I did. From the moment you handed me a box of canned goods and told me to stop carrying everything alone." She laughed, tears threatening. "You were terrible at lifting. I was terrible at breathing," he murmured, "until I met you." She turned in his arms and kissed him gently, slow, familiar, full of a decade of shared mornings and forgiven mistakes and whispered dreams beneath warm blankets. When they arrived at the center, applause filled the entrance. Children ran to greet Amelia. Volunteers hugged Olivia, and staff members shook Luke's hand with genuine affection. He had earned this community not with his last name, but with his consistency, humility, and heart. Diane, now retired but still attending every major event, approached with misty eyes. "You two built something extraordinary," she said softly. "We all did," Olivia replied, squeezing the woman's hands. Malik, now 19, taller than both Olivia and Luke, walked up with a grin. He had become one of the center's strongest youth mentors and was preparing to start college on a scholarship he swore he earned fair and square. "You ready to cut the ribbon?" he asked Luke. Luke nodded, smiling. "Only if you promise not to make fun of my speech." "No promises," Malik teased, then hugged Olivia. "You saved my life, you know." She hugged him back, tears forming. "You saved your own. We just handed you the tools." As the ceremony began, Luke stood before the crowd. Cameras flashed, but this time the attention no longer felt predatory. It felt earned, welcome, balanced. Luke cleared his throat. 10 years ago, I was lost," he began. "I thought I had to run from my mistakes, from my past, from myself. But I stumbled into this center, into this city, into people who showed me that healing isn't found in isolation." He looked at Olivia, his voice thickening. "It's found in love." She felt her chest tighten, her eyes shimmering. "This wing is dedicated not just to education," he continued, "but to the belief that every person deserves a second chance. I was given mine here. The audience erupted in applause. After the ceremony, when dusk painted the snow in lavender and gold, Olivia and Luke lingered on the centre's rooftop terrace. Emilia played downstairs with other children, her laughter echoing faintly. Luke wrapped his coat around Olivia's shoulders. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "Your old world." He kissed her temple. "Only the parts I never really had." She leaned into him. "And now, he whispered, "I have more than I ever dreamed. A family, a purpose, and the woman I loved before I even understood what love was." She cupped his cheek. "Luke." He brushed a thumb beneath her eye. 10 years, Olivia. 10 years, and I still wake up grateful that you opened your door the night I knocked." Her voice trembled. "And I still wake up grateful that you stayed." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest as snow drifted gently around them. The city lights glittered like stars fallen to earth. Their love had survived scandal, fear, separation, and truth. It had grown with them, softened with them, strengthened them. And as they stood together beneath the falling snow, Olivia felt certainty bloom in her heart. Some loves were storms, theirs was winter and fire, cold that shaped them, warmth that saved them, and 10 years of devotion that made everything that followed feel like a blessing. She whispered into his chest, voice soft and full. "Here's to the next 10. Luke kissed her deeply, tenderly, as though sealing a vow spoken not with words, but with time. "To the next 10, he whispered, and the city around them, once witness to their beginning, now quietly celebrated their forever. Every love story carries a lesson, and Luke and Olivia's journey leaves us with many. It reminds us that the past does not define our future, that redemption is possible even when the world doubts us, and that the greatest transformations often begin with a single moment of courage. Above all, their story shows that love is not measured by perfection, but by presence, by choosing each other through fears, storms, and years. Luke learned that vulnerability is not weakness. Olivia discovered that strength does not mean standing alone. And together, they proved that healing happens when two hearts decide to fight for one another, one day at a time. Their love did not survive in spite of adversity. It survived because they faced it with honesty, tenderness, and unwavering hope. If this story touched you, if you felt something stir as Luke confronted his past, or as Olivia opened her heart to trust again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Tell me which moment resonated with you the most and what lesson you're taking with you today. And to show that you stayed with this narration until the very end, write the word snowlight in the comments. It's a symbol in this story, the snow that witnessed their darkest hours and their brightest new beginnings. If you wish to support the team that works hard to bring these emotional stories to life, you can send a super thanks in whatever amount you feel comfortable with. Your generosity helps keep these narratives alive. And if you cannot support financially, sharing this story with friends and family is another beautiful way to help our channel grow. Thank you for watching with your heart. And if you want to continue experiencing more romantic, dramatic, and deeply emotional tales like this one, I've left other narrations for you in the cards. Let yourself be carried into another world.